Muhammad Ali exposes the fighter he hated more than anyone. It was 1974. Muhammad Ali sat in a dark room. Not a hotel, not a training facility. A real room. The kind where the walls close in on you. He was watching tape, not highlight reels, not victories. He was watching Sonny Liston. And something in his chest broke. Because Sonny Liston wasn't just a fighter Ali hated. Liston was the reason Ali understood what it meant to lose everything. Not a fight. Everything. Ali's hands were shaking as he spoke into a recorder that day. He said words he'd never said in public. Words about a man he'd spent a decade running from. Words about a monster he'd created with his own two hands. I made him worse, Ali said. I made him into something even darker than what he already was. That confession would haunt him for the rest of his life. Because here's what nobody tells you. Muhammad Ali didn't hate Sonny Liston because Liston was evil. Ali hated Liston because Ali saw himself in him, and that terrified him. This is the story nobody wants to tell. Let's go back. 1963. Cassius Clay was 21 years old, fast, cocky, hungry. But he wasn't a champion. He wasn't even the best heavyweight alive. That title belonged to Sonny Liston. Liston was something else entirely. He was a man built in a prison cell. Literally. Liston's childhood wasn't a childhood. It was a crime scene. Abusive father. Poverty so deep it had teeth. By the time Liston was a teenager, prison seemed like an upgrade. When he came out, he was a different animal. 6'1", 220 pounds of muscle and rage. Hands that could shatter bone. A jab that was less a punch and more a declaration of war. Fighters didn't step into the ring with Liston hoping to win. They stepped in hoping to survive. In 5 years, Liston knocked out 25 men. 25. The boxing establishment didn't know what to do with him. He was too powerful, too dangerous, too real. But they had to recognize him because nobody could stop him. Floyd Patterson held the heavyweight title. The boxing world whispered that Patterson was the rightful champion, that Liston was too crude, too rough around the edges, too dangerous for the sport. They were protecting a man from a monster they'd created. Liston fought Patterson in 1962. Patterson lasted 2 minutes and 6 seconds. 2 minutes. That was the heavyweight championship of the world. When Patterson got up, and he barely got up, his face was rearranged. Blood everywhere. One eye swollen shut. And Liston had taken the title the way a predator takes prey. Efficiently. Completely. Without mercy. Now Liston was champion. And nobody in the heavyweight division wanted anything to do with him. Nobody except a 21-year-old kid from Louisville named Cassius Clay. This is where the story gets real. Cassius Clay didn't just challenge Sonny Liston. He attacked him. Not in the ring. Before the ring. Outside. In the press. In the streets. Clay understood something about American celebrity that Liston never would. The narrative mattered more than the fight. Clay started showing up at Liston's training camps. Not to learn. To mock. He'd scream at Liston's sparring partners. He'd call Liston names in front of reporters. He'd follow Liston's car. He'd find him at restaurants and humiliate him publicly. "Sonny is a bum!" Clay would scream. A prehistoric bum. The big ugly bear. I'm going to take his title. For months. Month after month. And here's what Clay understood, what made him a genius, was that Liston had no response. Liston was a criminal, an ex-con, a man with a reputation so dark that the establishment had already decided he wasn't civilized enough for polite society. So when Clay called him names, when Clay degraded him, Liston couldn't respond without confirming every prejudice America already had about him. If Liston fought back verbally, he looked like the thug everyone said he was. If he stayed silent, he looked weak. Clay had trapped him perfectly. February 25th, 1964. Miami Beach Convention Center. The fight. Liston was a 7-1 favorite. The odds weren't even close. Most boxing writers didn't believe Clay could last 3 rounds. One famous sports writer said Clay would die in that ring. Not lose. Die. But something happened that night. Clay moved like nothing Liston had ever seen before. He was faster, sharper. His footwork was poetry. His defense was impenetrable. And when he threw combinations, they came from angles Liston's brain couldn't process. By the 3rd round, Liston's eyes were swollen. By the 5th, he was gasping for air. Then came the 6th round. There's still debate about what happened. Some say Liston's people threw in the towel because he couldn't see. Some say the damage to his shoulder made it impossible to fight. Some people, conspiracy theorists and documentarians, say it was fixed. What nobody debates is this. Sonny Liston stayed on that stool and never came back out. The kid had taken his title, the heavyweight champion of the world, gone. And in that moment, something shifted in Cassius Clay's soul. He destroyed a man who had been invincible, and the city celebrated like a saint had vanquished a demon. But Clay knew the truth. He hadn't beaten a demon. He'd created one. Here's where the story gets dark. Sonny Liston never recovered. Not physically, not mentally, not spiritually. The rematch happened 14 months later, Boston, 1965. But Sonny Liston wasn't the same animal anymore. Something had broken inside him. He'd been beaten not just by a man, but by narrative, by American mythology, by the weight of being exactly what everyone wanted him to be, a villain. In the first minute of round 1, Muhammad Ali, he'd changed his name by now, threw a punch, a phantom punch, a punch so fast, so subtle, that to this day, boxing experts can't agree on whether it actually landed. But Sonny Liston went down anyway. He didn't get up. And when Ali stood over him, screaming, "Get up! Get up, coward!" It wasn't about boxing anymore. It was about psychological domination. Ali had won the narrative war so completely that he didn't even need to win the physical war anymore. The referee counted to 10. Liston stayed down for 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30. Ali walked around the ring like he'd just conquered the world. And maybe he had. But Sonny Liston? Sonny Liston had lost something worse than a championship. He'd lost his mind. What happened next matters. After that night, Sonny Liston fell into a different kind of darkness. He took fights he shouldn't have taken. Against younger men, hungrier men, men who wanted to prove themselves against a legend. In 1966, he lost to a man named Cleveland Williams in the first round. He was finished, 34 years old, physically broken, mentally destroyed. He moved to Las Vegas and disappeared into the underworld. He got involved with dangerous people, very dangerous people, the kind of men who don't forget you when you fail to deliver. Liston became a loan shark's muscle, a criminal's enforcer, the monster everyone had always said he was. And in December 1970, Sonny Liston was found dead in his apartment. Dead for days before anyone even noticed. A bullet in his body, a syringe in his arm, no witnesses, no investigation worth mentioning. He was 38 years old. Now, here's where Muhammad Ali's conscience enters the story. Years later, when Ali was no longer fighting, when the narrative wasn't about winning anymore, when the cameras had mostly stopped rolling, Ali started thinking about what he'd done. Not just the fights, the campaign, the systematic destruction of a man's humanity on the world stage. Ali started reading books about Liston's childhood, about his father, about the brutality that created him. Ali learned that Sonny Liston wasn't evil. he was broken. That his criminal record wasn't evidence of who he was. It was evidence of who the world had made him. And Ali understood something that kept him awake at night. If Sonny Liston had been born in Louisville instead of Arkansas, if Sonny Liston had had a mother like Ali's mother, if Sonny Liston had found Islam instead of finding crime, they could have been brothers. Instead, Ali had spent a decade turning him into a villain on television, and Liston had spent a decade becoming that villain in reality. Ali had written the narrative, and Liston had lived it out until the narrative killed him. That's when Ali said the words that haunt this story. I made him worse. I made him into something even darker than what he already was. Not I beat him, not I was faster or I was smarter. Not the victory story, the consequence story. The moment when the greatest fighter who ever lived understood that his mouth had done more damage than his hands ever could. And that damage didn't come back to him. It came back to Sonny Liston. Muhammad Ali spent his last years, when Parkinson's had stolen his words, when the speed was gone, when all that remained was the man, trying to make peace with what he'd done. He never quite got there, because you can't undo narrative. You can't unsay the things you've said about another human being when the whole world is listening. The damage is permanent. Sonny Liston died alone in a Las Vegas apartment. A man who once made the heavyweight champion Floyd Patterson quit in 2 minutes. A man who was once the most feared fighter on earth. And almost nobody noticed. Almost nobody cared. Because Muhammad Ali had already written the story. And in America, the narrative always wins. Here's the truth. Nobody wants to say out loud, Muhammad Ali was the better fighter. He was faster, smarter, more skilled. But he was also crueler. And the cruelty wasn't just about boxing. It was about taking a broken man and breaking him further. It was about using your gifts, your speed, your intellect, your access to the media, as a weapon against someone who had no defense. Sonny Liston came from nothing. He never had a chance to be anything other than what the world made him. And Muhammad Ali, with all his genius and all his charisma, made sure of that. The irony. Ali became a symbol of redemption, of standing up to injustice, of refusing to be silent, which he did. But the cost was paid by Sonny Liston. Sit with that for a moment.